The alarm bells rang through Kepler Station like angry metal birds. Commander Jake Morrison jumped from his chair in the command center, coffee spilling across his desk. The red lights flashing on every screen told him this was not a drill. "What do we have, Amy?" He called to Lieutenant Amy Carter, who was bent over her communications console, her fingers dancing across the controls. "3 distress signals, sir, all coming in at once." Amy's voice was tight with worry. "The first one is from the Zephyrian trade convoy near the Outer Rim. They're under attack." Jake moved to her station. The Zephyrians were good people, peaceful traders who had been humanity's first real alien friends. Their bird-like faces and gentle nature made them easy targets for bullies. "The second signal is from the Nereid colonies in the Deep Blue sector," Amy continued. "Someone is destroying their underwater cities one by one." The Nereids were even more peaceful than the Zephyrians. They lived in beautiful coral cities beneath the waves of their water worlds, creating art and music that could make humans cry with its beauty. Jake had visited their worlds twice and felt like he was swimming in a dream. "And the third?" Jake asked, though he was starting to see a pattern that made his stomach turn cold. "The Hive Collective. Their entire home system is going dark. The last message we got talked about some kind of plague weapon." Amy looked up at him with frightened eyes. "Commander, someone is hitting all the peaceful species at once." Before Jake could answer, another alarm sounded. This one was different, deeper. It meant a ship was coming through the jump gate, and it was coming fast. "Ship approaching," called Sergeant Tony Martinez from the scanner station. "It's the Terra Nova, Captain Ben Hughes commanding. They're requesting emergency docking." "Let them in," Jake ordered. "And clear Medical Bay 3. Something tells me they're going to need it." An hour later, Jake stood in the docking bay watching as Captain Ben Hughes led a group of refugees off his ship. But these were not ordinary refugees. There were tall, thin Zephyrians with their beautiful blue feathers now dirty and broken. There were Nereids in mobile water tanks, their gill slits fluttering in panic. There were even a few of the insect-like hive members, their compound eyes dim with exhaustion. "Ben," Jake said, shaking his old friend's hand. "What happened out there?" Ben's face was hard as stone. "It's bad, Jake, worse than the signals made it sound. Someone calling themselves the Hegemony is moving through known space like a plague. They don't just attack worlds, they erase them." "What do you mean, erase them?" Ben led Jake to a quiet corner where they could talk. "I mean, they take everything. Not just the resources or the territory. They take the people, the culture, the history. They have some kind of device that messes with minds. The survivors I picked up, half of them can't even remember their own names." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. I wish it was." Ben pulled out a small data pad and showed Jake a recording. "This is what's left of Zephyr Prime." The screen showed a world Jake had visited just 6 months ago. It had been covered in floating cities, beautiful structures that hung in the clouds like silver dreams. Now there was nothing but empty sky and burning ground. Even worse, Jake could see ships in orbit, and they were not moving like rescue vessels. They were moving like hunters. "The Hegemony is made up of 4 different species," Ben continued. "All of them are warriors. All of them are mean as hell. But that's not the worst part. There's worse. They learn from every fight, every species they conquer. They study how they fight, how they think, how they live. Then they use that knowledge against the next target." Ben's voice dropped to a whisper. "Jake, they've been asking questions about humans." The words hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. "What kind of questions?" "How we fight. How we organize. What makes us angry. What makes us afraid." Ben looked around to make sure no one was listening. One of the refugees, a Nereid named Coral Singer in deep waters, she heard Hegemony soldiers talking. They mentioned Earth by name. Jake closed his eyes and tried to think. Humanity had been in space for almost 200 years now, but they had always tried to be the good guys. They explored, they traded, they made friends. They had fought a few wars, but only when attacked first. Most alien species saw humans as the helpful neighbors, the ones you called when you needed something fixed or when pirates were causing trouble. "We need to call Earth," Jake said finally. "Already tried. The message will take 3 days to get there through the relay network." Ben put his hand on Jake's shoulder. "But Jake, I don't think we have 3 days. The refugees are telling me stories. The Hegemony doesn't just move fast, they move smart. They've been planning this for years." That evening, Jake sat in his quarters reading reports from the refugees. Each story was worse than the last. The Zephyrians told of cities burned from the sky while families tried to evacuate. The Nereids spoke of poison dropped into their oceans, killing everything that lived there. The hive members, when they could remember enough to speak, talked about a sickness that made their people forget how to work together. But the worst stories came from species Jake had never heard of before. The refugees spoke of dozens of civilizations that had already fallen to the hegemony. Some had been enslaved. Others had been wiped out completely. A few had been turned into weapons against their own friends. There was a soft knock on his door. "Come in." Amy Carter entered, carrying a cup of coffee and looking tired. "Thought you might need this, sir." "Thanks." Jake took the coffee and gestured for her to sit down. "What do you think, Amy? Your dad's the president. What would he do in a situation like this?" Amy was quiet for a long moment. President Alex Carter was known throughout human space as a man who thought carefully before acting. "He'd want to help," she said finally. "But he'd also worry about getting humanity involved in a war that isn't ours. And if it becomes our war, then we fight." Amy's voice was steady and sure. "But Dad always says that humans don't fight to start wars. We fight to end them." Jake nodded. "That was the human way. Always had been. Humans would try diplomacy first, try to find a peaceful solution. But when pushed too far, when innocent people were being hurt, humans had a way of ending problems permanently." The communication system crackled to life. "Commander Morrison to the bridge. Priority message coming in." Jake and Amy ran to the command center. On the main screen was a face Jake had hoped never to see. Angular, cruel, with eyes like cold metal. It was clearly alien, but it spoke perfect English. "Humans of Kepler Station." The voice was like grinding stone. "We are the hegemony. We have studied your species for many cycles. You are interesting, but you are also in our way. You have 30 of your days to evacuate all human colonies and return to your home world. After that, we will begin the cleansing. Do not attempt to interfere with our operations. We've already marked your world for processing." The message ended, leaving the bridge in dead silence. Jake looked around at his crew, then at the refugees who had gathered to listen. Finally, he looked at Amy. "Send a message to Earth. Tell them we need the fleet. All of it." "What should I tell them we're planning to do?" Amy asked. Jake stared at the dark screen where the hegemony's message had been. "Tell them we're going to end a war." 3 days later, the emergency session of the United Earth Council was the most heated debate in human history. President Alex Carter sat at the head of the long table, watching as representatives from every human colony argued about what to do next. "We cannot get involved in an alien war," insisted Representative Maria Santos from the Mars colonies. "Humanity has spent 2 centuries building a reputation as peacekeepers and explorers. If we start acting like conquerors, we become no better than the hegemony." General Ryan Brooks, head of Earth Defense Command, slammed his hand on the table. "They've already made it our war, Maria." The message to Kepler Station was clear. "They're coming for us next." "But we don't know that for sure," argued Dr. Helen Carter, the president's sister and head of the Xenobiology Institute. "Maybe they're just trying to scare us. Maybe if we stay out of their way, they'll leave us alone." President Carter raised his hand for silence. "Ryan, what does our intelligence tell us about the hegemony's capabilities?" The general activated a holographic display above the table. It showed star maps with red zones spreading like a disease across known space. "Agent Kate Sullivan has been undercover in hegemony territory for 8 months. Her reports paint a very clear picture." Kate Sullivan's image appeared on the screen. She looked tired and scared, speaking in a whisper from some dark hiding place. "Mr. President, the hegemony is not just another aggressive species. They are systematic in their approach to conquest. They study their targets for years before attacking. They know our ship designs, our weapons, our tactics. They've even captured human prisoners from remote outposts and have been experimenting on them." The room fell silent. The idea of humans being used for experiments made everyone's blood run cold. Kate's report continued. "But that's not the worst part. They've developed biological weapons specifically designed to target human DNA. They tested it on Colony 7 in the Outer Rim. There are no survivors." President Carter closed his eyes. Colony 7 had been home to 15,000 people, including children. "How long before they're ready to use these weapons on a large scale?" "Based on what I've seen, maybe 6 months. They're preparing to hit our colonies one by one, then Earth itself. But they want us to know it's coming. They want us to be afraid." Dr. Eric Rodriguez, Earth's top expert on alien biology, leaned forward. Kate, you said they've been studying us for years. How is that possible? We've never had contact with them before. They've been using other species as spies, Kate answered. Species we trusted. The hegemony doesn't just conquer, they corrupt. They find ways to turn friends into enemies, allies into weapons. Some of the species we've been trading with for decades have been reporting back to them. Representative Santos looked sick. You're saying our friends have been betraying us? Not by choice, Kate said quickly. The hegemony has ways of controlling minds, of making people do things they would never normally do. I've seen it myself. Good people turned into puppets. Admiral Lisa Torres, commander of the Space Fleet, spoke for the first time. Even if we decide to fight, we're outnumbered. The hegemony has conquered dozens of civilizations. They have resources we can't match. Numbers aren't everything, said Colonel Steve Walsh, who had been listening quietly. The reports from Kepler Station suggest something interesting. The hegemony fights like they expect their enemies to fight back the same way everyone else does. But humans don't fight like anyone else. President Carter looked at his daughter's message from Kepler Station. Amy had included detailed interviews with the refugees, and their stories all pointed to the same thing. The hegemony was used to enemies who either surrendered quickly or fought in predictable ways. What are you suggesting, Colonel? I'm suggesting that maybe the hegemony has made a mistake. They've studied human military tactics, but they don't understand human nature. They think we'll either run away or charge straight at them. They don't expect us to do something completely different. Dr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. The refugees mentioned something interesting. Every species the hegemony has conquered tried to fight them the same way. Military against military, warship against warship. But what if we didn't do that? What else is there? Asked Admiral Torres. We do what humans do best, said Colonel Walsh. We get creative. The debate went on for hours, but President Carter could see which way it was heading. The evidence was clear. The hegemony was coming for humanity whether they fought back or not. The only question was whether they would die fighting or die helpless. Finally, Captain Dan Foster, who had been quiet through most of the meeting, spoke up. Mr. President, I've been thinking about something my grandfather used to say. He was in the military during the old wars on Earth. He said that good soldiers don't fight because they hate what's in front of them. They fight because they love what's behind them. President Carter looked around the table at these people he had worked with for years. They were scientists and soldiers, explorers and diplomats. They had spent their careers trying to make the galaxy a better place. Now they were being asked to become something else. If we do this, the president said slowly, we need to be clear about what we're fighting for. We're not fighting to build an empire. We're not fighting for revenge. We're fighting to protect innocent people, human and alien alike. The refugees on Kepler Station, Amy had written in her report, keep asking the same question. They want to know if humans will help them get their worlds back, their families back, their lives back. They don't want us to conquer the hegemony. They want us to free the people the hegemony has enslaved. General Brooks nodded. It won't be easy. We'll have to completely rethink how we approach warfare. Instead of focusing on destroying the enemy, we'll need to focus on saving the victims. Can it be done? Asked President Carter. I don't know, Brooks admitted. But if anyone can figure out how to fight a war focused on saving people instead of killing enemies, it's us. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Humanity would go to war, but it would be a different kind of war than the galaxy had ever seen. As the meeting ended, President Carter stood at the window of his office, looking out at the blue and green world that had given birth to humanity. In 6 months, that world might be under attack. In a year, it might be gone. But humanity had survived ice ages and plagues, wars, and disasters. They had learned to cooperate with strangers, to help those in need, to solve problems that seemed impossible. If they were going to face the end of everything they had built, they would face it as humans always had, together, and fighting for something bigger than themselves. The president picked up his communication device and sent a message to every human colony, every ship, every outpost in known space. Citizens of humanity, we face a threat unlike any we have encountered before, an enemy that seeks not just to defeat us, but to erase us from history. We could run and maybe some of us would survive. We could surrender, and maybe some of us would be allowed to live as slaves. But that is not who we are. We are the species that looked at an impossible ocean and built boats. We are the species that looked at an empty sky and built rockets. We are the species that met strangers from distant worlds and made them friends. Today we choose to fight. Not because we love war, but because we love peace. Not because we hate our enemies, but because we love our friends. We fight not to begin a war, but to end one. The galaxy will learn that humans don't start wars. But when innocent people are suffering, when freedom itself is under attack, humans will finish them. The message went out across space, carrying with it a promise and a warning. Humanity was coming, and they were bringing something the hegemony had never faced before: hope. 6 months after President Carter's declaration, the galaxy was learning that humans fought wars differently than anyone else. Admiral Jack Freeman stood on the bridge of the Earthship Liberty, watching as his fleet approached the first target, a world the hegemony had conquered 3 years ago. But this was not a normal attack fleet. Along with his 12 warships, Freeman had brought 30 hospital ships, 20 engineering vessels, and 40 cargo ships full of food, medicine, and supplies. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony forces in orbit," reported Captain Laura Adams, his communications officer. "They're demanding to know why we've brought so many non-military ships." Freeman smiled grimly. "Tell them they're about to find out." The world below had once been home to a species called the HFY, proud warrior poets who had fought bravely against the hegemony before being overwhelmed. According to intelligence reports, the survivors had been turned into slave soldiers and were now fighting for their conquerors. "Remember the mission," Freeman announced to his fleet. "We're not here to destroy this world. We're here to free it. Every HFY down there is a victim, not an enemy. Our job is to break their chains, not their spirits." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The hegemony ships attacked in their usual pattern, trying to draw the human fleet into a direct fight. But the human ships did something unexpected. They ignored the enemy warships and headed straight for the planet's surface. While hegemony commanders tried to figure out what the humans were doing, human landing parties were already on the ground. But instead of attacking military targets, they were hitting the mind control centers that kept the HFY enslaved. Dr. Nancy Kim led the cultural recovery teams. She had spent months studying how the hegemony's mind control worked, and her teams carried special devices designed to break the neural conditioning without harming the victims. "We've located the primary control center," reported Commander Steve Walsh over the radio. His Phoenix squadron had become famous for these lightning-fast rescue missions. "Beginning liberation sequence now." What happened next amazed even the human soldiers. As the mind control devices shut down, the enslaved HFY began to remember who they were. The warrior poets who had been forced to fight for their conquerors suddenly remembered their own people, their own culture, their own songs. The HFY turned on their hegemony masters with a fury that shook the ground. But more importantly, they turned to the humans with something that had been missing from their lives for 3 years. Hope. "Thank you," said HFY War singer Bright Blade in Morning Light, his voice shaking with emotion as Dr. Kim's team helped him remember his own name. "We thought we were lost forever, but the humans weren't finished." As soon as the world was secure, the hospital ships landed and began treating the former slaves. The engineering ships started rebuilding the destroyed cities. The cargo ships distributed food and supplies to families that had been separated for years. "This is impossible," muttered hegemony Commander Thraxel as he watched the human fleet from his prison cell. "No species fights like this. You should be celebrating your victory, not helping your enemies." Captain Pete Johnson, who was in charge of prisoner processing, looked at the confused alien. "You're not our enemy. You're just someone who's been making bad choices, and we're here to help you make better ones." The human approach was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Every world they liberated became a beacon of hope for others. The freed species didn't just go back to their old lives. They joined the human cause, adding their ships and soldiers to the growing liberation fleet. The Zephyrians, with their knowledge of trade routes, became expert scouts. The Nereids, with their talent for underwater combat, helped liberate ocean worlds. The HFY, burning with righteous anger, became some of the fiercest fighters in the human fleet. But it was the rescued hive members who provided the most important intelligence. Worker Drone, who remembers freedom, had been connected to the hegemony's communication network before his liberation. He told the humans something that changed everything. "The 4 species that make up the hegemony," he explained in his buzzing voice. "They are not the real enemy. They are slaves too, controlled by something they call the control. It is ancient, older than any of our civilizations. It sees free will as a disease to be cured. Admiral Freeman called an emergency meeting of all fleet commanders. The news that the hegemony species were also victims complicated everything. If the hegemony forces are also enslaved, said Colonel Maria Santos, then we're not just fighting to free the conquered worlds. We're fighting to free everyone. Dr. Eric Rodriguez, who had joined the fleet as a biological warfare expert, shook his head. The control has been operating for thousands of years. It's had time to perfect its methods. The hegemony species might be so deeply conditioned that they can't be saved. We have to try, said Captain Laura Adams firmly. It's what makes us human. The turning point came during the liberation of the Nereid homeworld. The hegemony had turned the beautiful underwater cities into breeding grounds for their biological weapons. As human forces fought to shut down the weapon factories, they discovered something horrifying. The hegemony soldiers running the facilities were crying. Please, begged a reptilian hegemony trooper as Captain Dan Foster's team captured him. Please kill me. I don't want to do this anymore, but I can't stop. Make it stop. Dr. Kim examined the prisoner and found neural implants that were more sophisticated than anything they had seen before. The control wasn't just giving orders. It was directly manipulating the soldiers' brains, forcing them to act against their own moral instincts. No wonder they're so effective, she reported to Admiral Freeman. They're not just following orders. They're being forced to do things that go against everything they believe in, and they're fully aware of it. They're trapped in their own bodies. The revelation changed everything. Human forces began modifying their tactics again, this time focusing on capturing hegemony soldiers alive so they could be treated. It was dangerous work. The enslaved soldiers fought desperately not because they wanted to win, but because the control wouldn't let them surrender. But slowly, one world at a time, one soldier at a time, humanity began to free not just the conquered species, but their conquerors as well. The freed hegemony soldiers were often the most grateful. They had been forced to commit terrible acts against their will, and many expected the liberated species to seek revenge. Instead, they found forgiveness and help. We were their prisoners too, explained Kethvar Brightblade to a group of freed hegemony soldiers. We understand what it's like to be forced to hurt people you don't want to hurt. We're all victims here. As the human fleet grew larger, incorporating ships and soldiers from dozens of species, the galaxy began to see something it had never seen before. A truly united force fighting not for conquest or revenge, but for the simple idea that every intelligent being had the right to be free. The control, watching from its ancient strongholds, began to realize that it faced something it had never encountered in thousands of years of conquest. It faced an enemy that wouldn't be satisfied with victory, an enemy that insisted on healing the wounds of war even as the war was still being fought. For the first time in its long existence, the control began to feel something that might have been fear. The humans were coming, and they were bringing something more dangerous than weapons or armies. They were bringing the idea that no one, not the conquered, not the conquerors, not even the control itself, was beyond saving. And that idea, once planted, was very difficult to kill. The rescued prisoners from the hegemony research facility changed everything humanity thought they knew about their enemy. Intelligence Officer Tony Martinez stood in the briefing room aboard Admiral Freeman's flagship, looking at data that made his blood run cold. The facility we liberated wasn't just a prison, he reported to the assembled fleet commanders. It was a testing ground. The control has been experimenting on representatives from every known species in the galaxy, trying to find the perfect way to enslave each one. Dr. Helen Carter, who had arrived from Earth with a team of scientists, pulled up holographic displays showing the facility's research. What we found there is both horrifying and enlightening. The control isn't just an advanced computer system. It's a collective consciousness made up of billions of enslaved minds, all connected together and controlled by an ancient artificial intelligence. Captain Ben Hughes, now commanding a joint human-alien task force, leaned forward. Are you saying that every hegemony soldier is connected to this thing? Not just soldiers, Dr. Carter replied grimly. Civilians, administrators, even children. The entire hegemony civilization is one giant slave network. They don't just follow the control's orders. They literally cannot think thoughts that the control doesn't want them to think. Former hegemony scientist Zeftar, whose mind had been freed during the facility rescue, spoke up in his translated voice. The control calls it the Great Unity. It believes that individual consciousness is the source of all suffering in the universe. Its goal is to connect every living mind to itself, creating perfect order and perfect peace. By destroying free will, added worker drone who remembers freedom, his insectoid features displaying obvious disgust, the control cannot understand that consciousness without choice is not consciousness at all. Admiral Freeman studied the data with growing concern. If the entire hegemony civilization is enslaved, then we're not just fighting an army. We're fighting to save an entire people who don't know they need saving. The breakthrough came when Dr. Nancy Kim's cultural recovery team made contact with something unexpected, a group of hegemony citizens who were resisting the control from within. They called themselves the Silent Rebellion, and they had been secretly fighting their own mental enslavement for generations. "We cannot speak our thoughts aloud," explained Kralvex, a hegemony engineer whose mind had developed natural resistance to the control's influence. "But we can think them. We remember what it was like before the control found our worlds. We remember freedom." The Silent Rebellion had been working for decades to find ways to weaken the control's influence. They had developed techniques for hiding thoughts, for protecting small pockets of consciousness from the control's scanning systems. More importantly, they had mapped the locations of the control's primary processing centers. "There are 12 core facilities," Kralvex explained through a heavily encrypted communication channel. "Each one controls a different sector of space, but they are all connected to the central core, which is hidden in the void between, the dead space at the center of our galaxy." Captain Steve Walsh, whose Phoenix squadron had become experts at impossible rescue missions, studied the facility locations. "If we could shut down these processing centers, would that free the enslaved populations?" "It would kill them," Zeftar said bluntly. "The control has been managing their basic life functions for so long that most cannot survive without it. Their minds would be free, but their bodies would die within hours." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. To truly defeat the control, humanity would have to find a way to gradually disconnect billions of enslaved minds without killing them. It was a medical and technological challenge unlike anything they had ever faced. "How long would it take?" asked Dr. Carter. "Years," admitted Dr. Eric Rodriguez, who had been studying the control's neural interface technology. "We would have to disconnect people gradually, giving their minds time to remember how to control their own bodies. And we would need to do it while fighting off the control's attempts to stop us." Commander Jake Morrison, who had arrived from Kepler Station with additional intelligence, added another complication. "The control isn't waiting for us to figure this out. Our spies report that it's preparing something called the Final Unity, a plan to forcibly connect every remaining free mind in the galaxy to itself. If it succeeds, there will be no more individual consciousness anywhere." Admiral Freeman looked around at his officers, seeing the weight of the decision in their faces. They could continue their current strategy, liberating worlds one at a time while the control prepared to enslave everyone else. Or they could attempt something that had never been done before, a simultaneous galaxy-wide operation to disconnect the control's network while keeping its victims alive. "What are our chances?" he asked quietly. "Honestly, sir," said Colonel Pete Johnson, "pretty bad. We're talking about the largest medical operation in galactic history, while simultaneously fighting the largest military operation in galactic history against an enemy that can think faster than we can and has access to resources we can't match. So why are we even considering it?" Captain Laura Adams answered without hesitation. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because those people deserve to be free, even if freeing them might cost us everything." The decision came down to a vote among the fleet commanders. It wasn't even close. Every single commander, human and alien alike, voted to attempt the liberation of the entire control network. The planning took months. Dr. Kim developed protocols for mass neural rehabilitation. Dr. Rodriguez designed portable life support systems that could keep disconnected minds stable while their bodies remembered how to function. Captain Walsh trained special insertion teams that could reach the processing centers through the control's defenses. But the most important development came from an unexpected source. The Silent Rebellion, working with human scientists, discovered that the control had a weakness. Its ancient programming included a safeguard designed to prevent it from harming itself. If they could convince the control that its actions were causing more suffering than freedom would, it might voluntarily shut down its network. It's a long shot, admitted Kralvex during a secret meeting with human commanders. The control has been rationalizing its actions for thousands of years. But if we could show it undeniable proof that its great unity is actually causing the suffering it seeks to eliminate, how do we prove that to a machine that controls the thoughts of everyone it talks to? Asked Amy Carter, who had been promoted to commander of the Liberation Fleet's communication division. We show it something it has never seen before, said Worker Drone, who remembers freedom. We show it what genuine happiness looks like, what real peace looks like, what actual unity looks like when it's chosen freely, instead of imposed by force. The final battle began not with weapons, but with a broadcast. Every liberated world, every freed species, every former slave who had rediscovered their own identity, sent the same message to the controls network simultaneously. They sang. The Zephyrians sang their ancient flight songs. The Nereids sang their deep water hymns. The Kethavar sang their warrior ballads. The Hive sang their working harmonies. And humans, as they always did, sang along with all of them, their voices weaving through the alien melodies like threads binding a tapestry together. The song that rose from the liberated worlds was not planned or coordinated. It was simply the natural expression of joy from beings who had thought they would never be free again. It was the sound of genuine unity, not the false unity of enslaved minds, but the real unity of different voices choosing to sing together. For the first time in its existence, the control heard something that made it pause. In all its calculations about peace and order, it had never accounted for the possibility that chaos could sound so beautiful, that freedom could create harmony instead of discord. And in that moment of hesitation, the largest rescue operation in galactic history began. 1 year after the Great Liberation, Ambassador Susan Wright stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Peace Station, watching as ships from dozens of species worked together to build something that had never existed before, a truly free galactic community. The massive space station hung in neutral space, built from the combined technologies of every liberated world. Zephyrian flight architecture blended with Nereid water gardens. Kethvar warrior sculptures stood beside human art galleries. The Hive had contributed their incredible organizational skills, creating a layout that somehow managed to feel both efficient and beautiful. It's remarkable, said Dr. Eric Rodriguez, joining Susan at the viewing window. A year ago, most of these species had never met each other. Now look at them. Below, Susan could see children from a dozen different worlds playing together in the station's central park. Human children chased Zephyrian younglings through the air currents while Nereid tadpoles splashed in specially designed pools. Even some young hegemony citizens, still recovering from their liberation, were slowly learning how to play instead of simply following orders. The liberation of the control network had been the largest and most complex operation in galactic history. It had taken 6 months of careful work to disconnect billions of enslaved minds without killing them. Even now, rehabilitation centers throughout the galaxy were helping former control victims remember how to think for themselves. The hardest part, Dr. Rodriguez continued, isn't the medical treatment. It's helping them understand that they're allowed to make their own choices now. Susan nodded sadly. She had seen the confusion in the eyes of liberated hegemony citizens when they were told they could choose their own jobs, their own homes, their own friends. Many of them had been connected to the control since birth and had never made a real decision in their lives. But there were success stories too. Kralvex, the former hegemony engineer who had helped lead the silent rebellion, now worked alongside human scientists to develop new technologies for peaceful purposes. Zeftar had established a research institute dedicated to studying consciousness and free will. Most importantly, they were teaching other liberated citizens that freedom was something to be celebrated, not feared. Ambassador Wright to the council chamber, came the announcement over the station's communication system. The emergency session is beginning. Susan sighed and headed toward the meeting. The Galactic Council's first major test had arrived, and it wasn't going well. 2 recently liberated species, the Mordak and the Veltar, were on the brink of war over mining rights to an asteroid field. Both species claimed that the resources were vital for their post-liberation reconstruction efforts. Both had legitimate arguments, and both were angry enough to start shooting. The old way of handling such disputes had been simple: Whoever had the stronger military took what they wanted. But the new Galactic Council was founded on different principles. Every dispute had to be resolved peacefully, with all parties benefiting from the solution. "It's impossible," insisted Mordak leader Stonecrusher of Mountains as Susan entered the council chamber. "They want the same asteroids we need. Someone has to lose. That's how the universe works." "No one has to lose," replied Captain Dan Foster, who now commanded the Galactic Restoration Fleet. "That's the whole point of what we're trying to build here." Veltar speaker Harmony in Crystal Caverns clicked her mandibles in frustration. Easy words from humans who have rich worlds to return to. "We lost everything to the control. These asteroids are all we have left to rebuild with." Susan took her seat at the mediation table, looking at the two groups of aliens who had been friends just months ago when they were both fighting for liberation. Now faced with the challenge of rebuilding their civilizations, old conflicts were rising to the surface. "Let's start with what each of you actually needs," she said calmly. "Not what you want, but what you need to survive and rebuild." Over the next several hours, negotiator Chris Baldwin and cultural specialist Dr. Beth Logan worked with both sides to identify their real requirements. The Mordak needed rare metals to rebuild their industrial infrastructure. The Veltar needed crystalline structures to restore their communication networks. "Here's an interesting fact," said Dr. Logan, pulling up geological surveys of the disputed asteroids. "The asteroids you're both fighting over contain both metals and crystals, but they're not the only source of either resource in this system." The holographic display showed the entire asteroid field, with different types of resources marked in different colors. There were more than enough materials for both species to rebuild, but only if they worked together to extract and process them efficiently. "We could establish a joint mining operation," suggested Captain Foster. "Both species working together, sharing the costs and the benefits." Stonecrusher shook his massive head. "Impossible. Mordak do not work with others. We are a proud, independent people." "So are we," added Harmony in Crystal Caverns. "Veltar have always handled our own affairs." Susan leaned back in her chair, thinking about a conversation she'd had with President Carter before leaving Earth. "Pride is important," she said finally. "But I'm curious about something. Stonecrusher, what makes you most proud of being Mordak?" The large alien considered the question seriously. "Our strength, our ability to overcome any challenge, our willingness to work harder than anyone else." "And Harmony in Crystal Caverns, what makes you most proud of being Veltar?" "Our precision, our attention to detail, our ability to create beauty from raw materials," Susan smiled. "So the Mordak are the strongest workers in the galaxy, and the Veltar are the most precise craftsmen. Imagine what you could accomplish if you combined those strengths." Dr. Baldwin activated another display, this one showing projections of what a joint mining operation could achieve. Working separately, each species could extract maybe 30% of the resources they need from this asteroid field. Working together, with Mordak's strength handling the heavy extraction and Veltar precision managing the processing, you could extract 90% of the available resources and do it in half the time. For the first time since the negotiations began, both leaders looked interested. "But how do we know they won't try to cheat us?" asked Stonecrusher. "How do we know you won't try to cheat us?" replied Harmony in Crystal Caverns. "Because," said Susan, "you'll both be part of the same operation. You'll see exactly what everyone is doing. And more importantly, you'll both be working toward the same goal, rebuilding your civilizations and taking care of your people." The negotiations took 3 more days, but eventually they reached an agreement. The joint mining operation would be overseen by a mixed crew of Mordak, Veltar, and neutral observers from other species. Profits would be shared based on contribution, but both sides would receive enough resources to meet their rebuilding needs. More importantly, the two species would be working together, learning about each other's cultures and capabilities. What started as a conflict had become an opportunity for cooperation. "This is what we're really building here," Susan explained to her staff after the agreement was signed. "Not just a political alliance, but a new way of thinking about problems. Instead of fighting over who gets what, we're learning to ask how we can all get what we need." 6 months later, the Mordak Veltar mining operation had become a model for similar partnerships throughout the galaxy. Other species were forming joint ventures, sharing technologies, and finding ways to help each other rebuild from the devastation of the control era. the most remarkable development came from an unexpected source. The former hegemony species, still struggling with their newfound freedom, had begun forming their own cooperation networks. Instead of trying to rebuild their old civilizations, they were creating something entirely new. Multi-species communities where different cultures blended together naturally. It makes sense. In a way, explained Kralvex during a conference on post-liberation reconstruction, we were all forced to be part of the same collective mind for so long that we learned to understand each other on a deep level. Now that we're free, we don't want to go back to being completely separate. The success of these mixed communities had inspired similar experiments on other worlds. Human colonies were welcoming alien refugees. Alien worlds were opening their doors to human scientists and artists. The galaxy was becoming more connected than ever before, but this time the connections were chosen freely. President Carter visited New Geneva Station to address the first full assembly of the Galactic Council. Representatives from over 200 species filled the Great Hall, including many former enemies who now worked side by side. "A year ago," he said, "we faced a choice between freedom and extinction. We chose freedom, even though it meant fighting a war none of us wanted. Today we face a different choice, between the easy path of returning to our old separate ways and the harder path of building something new together." He paused, looking out at the diverse crowd. "The galaxy has learned that humans don't fight to begin wars, we fight to end them. But ending a war isn't just about defeating your enemies. It's about building a peace that's worth the cost of victory." In the months that followed, the Galactic Council faced many more